Hey guys, welcome to episode 8 of Understanding with Jonty. Today I want to talk about something that's going to make some of you very happy and some of you very angry. And it's it's the danger of America becoming a shithole country. This is a phrase, if you haven't heard it, that was coined by Trump, and I thought it warranted some further discussion. Irrespective of what you think about that comment, what you think of the man who said it, I think it's worth talking about this prospect because it's something that none of us, whatever our political bent happens to be, none of us wants to happen. I think Trump's contention, whether directly stated or implied, is that people who come from these countries and immigrate to the US, they are making this country a shithole country. They are making it worse. They are jeopardizing the long-term safety and security of our country. I believe that is patently untrue. Actually, my concern isn't with the immigrants. My concern is with us real Americans, right? We are the ones that I really worry about. We are the ones that I'm concerned will turn this country into, if not a failed state, a stagnant state. Trump specifically referred to people from Haiti, El Salvador, the entire continent of Africa as coming from these types of countries, as posing that risk to all of us. Now, I like to think he would include Syria in that list because my father comes from Syria, and I do have some insights into that country that I can share with you. Many believe he's referring to all non-European countries, and this is a kind of dog whistle. But I think it's still worth considering because I do agree with him in one respect, and that's I don't want this country to become a failed state, to become a stagnant state, to go backwards. I really do hope we can actually flourish. In recent years, I think we've all adjusted our expectations for the future, but I do still have a lot of hope in this country and in our future and what we can truly become. And I don't mean any disrespect to any people from Syria or any of these countries, because I truly love, like, I know a lot of people from Syria, right? A lot of family. And so I have the utmost care and respect for these people. But many of them came here to America for that same reason, because they didn't see hope and opportunity in their own country. They saw something in America that they didn't see in their own country. They experienced rights here that they don't have in their own country. They experienced opportunities here that they don't have in their own countries. Many people who come here from around the world, they can agree that they want to see America succeed. They don't want to see us become like the countries that they came from. And I'm speaking to people who do come from these countries. There are a lot of red flags that they feel, that I agree with them on, that I feel that, we seem to be slipping into a mindset, a mentality, a worldview that is more like these third world countries that Trump refers to, and less like America, like the America I grew up in. So I want to start by sharing one of my earliest memories of what life in Syria was like, how it was different than the life I'd grown up in. My father was on a call with relatives from Syria, and I overheard the conversation, and I was curious, like, what do they think of life there? I think I'd heard something controversial on the news or whatever, and, or maybe I heard something my father said. But I was curious, like, I asked my father, like, what do they think of the government? What do they think of their country? And my father's like, I don't know, I didn't ask. And I was a very persistent person. I was like, why? Why didn't you ask? And he was like, then he had to explain to me the reality, right? Which is, if he asked them and they spoke their mind and their opinions were contrary to that of the government, then there was a real risk that they would get into trouble. Because the assumption is that the government is listening in to all calls, especially ones to the United States, European countries, like outside nations where people become more accustomed to freedom of speech. And so, he's like, I'm not going to ask them those questions because I'm not going to get them in trouble. And even if I did ask them, would they really tell me their honest opinions? So I can't even trust when I ask them a question that they're going to tell me the truth, because we all are assuming that the government's listening in on us. And there was a real risk that, if anybody had said anything controversial or that the government deemed offensive or undermining towards them, that they would be called in for questioning by the mukhabarat, by the intelligence agency. And that might lead to other things, theoretically it could lead to jail, imprisonment, it could lead to torture, maybe even death, depending on the severity, depending on the circumstances. But that's something that the people there learn to do. Just keep your head down. Just don't mess with the government. Don't speak your mind. They learn how to self-censor, how to speak as if someone is listening, because in all likelihood someone is listening. But it's so much more than that. These people leave countries like Syria, people like my father and countless others, looking for a better life, not just because they're being listened in on, but even something that we take for granted, religious freedom, right? You would think that in a Muslim country, you would be free to practice your faith, but Islam is seen as a potential enemy to the state. And so people who are religious are actively followed and watched carefully by the government, even to the point where I had a cousin born and raised here in America who was going to visit, relatives back in Syria. This is before the war in 2012. And his mother was concerned because he'd grown a beard, a little hipster beard, was trending at the time. And she's like, please shave it. Because she knew that if he went to Syria with that beard, certain officials, the intelligence gatherers, the mukhabarat, would look at him and assume that he was a practicing religious Muslim. And that would make him suspicious. That would warrant further investigation by these people. It would warrant further attention. And that was attention that his mother didn't want him to get. Just think about that for a minute. This is true for many Muslim countries, not just Syria. Many Muslim countries, I have friends, they share the stories of how the government very closely tracks religious people, and how being a religious Muslim puts you at risk for, being questioned, being jailed, being imprisoned, being tortured. And so it's something people are very cognizant of. And, when they come to America, there's this whole freedom that they experience in being Muslim, having like discussions about faith. And it's a freedom that they can't even have in a Muslim majority country. Even in the days after 9/11, all the scrutiny, all the drama that happened between the U.S. government and the Muslim community, even then we still had our right to worship. Yes, mosques were being watched, infiltrators, or what do you call them? Our own intelligence agency were sending informants into our mosques and going after people for, what would be considered trivial issues at any other time. But even then, the vast majority of Americans still felt free to practice their faith. And the sad reality is, in these countries, the only way that they can change their situation in life, they can gain the freedoms that we take for granted, is through revolution, a very bloody coup. You can see what happened in Syria. Since 2012, they've been fighting the government to try to gain some freedom. And unfortunately, what happens in those situations, opportunists come in. People who want influence in the country take one side or the other, and the country just got like thrown into an incredible, destructive, civil war that ravished the country. And when you're in that situation, you don't know if you're going to come out of the other side. If when you come out of the other side, you're going to have a government that's better than the one you went into it with. And so I just also want to emphasize how fortunate we are that, we may like or dislike our current government, but in a few years, we can vote them out and replace them with someone else. We have a bloodless revolution built into our system. This is an incredible blessing. I think, I sometimes forget, and I think many of us forget when we were born and raised here. So, like I said, I have a lot of friends who come from countries like this. I've had a lot of conversations with them, either them, the people who come here directly from these countries, or their children who have experience traveling back and forth and listening on conversations about what life is like there, or just firsthand experience. And there are certain trends. There's this thread that connects these countries, these failed or stagnant states, these countries that really, we don't want to end up in that situation. We don't want to become one of these states. So the first thread, that this commonality, is authoritarianism. The government demands obedience. They rule through fear. You must bend the knee. And the other thing is loyalty. Loyalty is rewarded over competence. And what do I mean by that? So they're looking for competent people, don't get me wrong. But a competent person that's loyal is more valuable than somebody who may be more competent but hasn't proven their loyalty. So that is a primary requirement for serving with these governments, for gaining advancements in these types of societies. You really need to prove your loyalty. So inevitably, the third commonality is the people want to leave. People don't like to be oppressed. They don't like to be told what to do. They don't like to have to bend the knee. All right. And so what you naturally get in these societies are wealthy and poor alike would like to leave. Unfortunately, usually it's the wealthy who have the means or ability to leave the country. And so you get a brain drain as a result. So the best and brightest often leave these countries. So corruption is the next commonality. In order to get things done, you have to bribe officials. You want a passport, you got to bribe them. You want a business license, you got to bribe them. You want marriage, whatever you want, most likely somebody's going to ask for a bribe. Or to look the other way, people also take bribes. So the police stop you on the road, you give them a little money, then you're off, you're fine. No need to show up at court, pay for your ticket, etc. And that's just the reality of these societies. People take bribes. You fly into the airport, even officials, they'll either hint at or directly ask you, where's my little taste? These nations also lose the concept of true and false, right and wrong. Instead, you have this concept of us and them, those who are on our side and those who are against us. That means you always have an enemy within, this feeling that you can't trust each other. Because of all these things, these societies tend to have a very weak economy. They're not doing well. And again, this feeds into this whole idea of an intelligence apparatus, people willing to rat out each other in order to gain some sort of favor, some sort of financial reward. As a result, they're more fearful, they lose their creativity. In general, each one of these aspects further feeds into this sense of hopelessness, fear, poverty, just a general sense of unhappiness and despair and lack of control over your own future and your own fate. Who do these governments serve, right? Because usually these revolutions, the people who organized it and executed this revolution, they were appealing to the people and telling them, look, we are going to make things better. This government, it's corrupt, it's this, it's that. We're going to change things. We're going to make everything better. And so usually these people are coming in with popular support, or at least hope that they will be doing a better job than the last government. But what eventually happens is, if they can't make the situation better for the people, then the people become the enemy. The government served its own interest. They're no longer interested in solving the people's problems. They are just there to protect themselves. And this is what happened with the communist revolution in Russia. Initially, Lenin stood up against the Tsar, promised the people a better life. By the time Stalin came around, the people became the enemy. The people had to be squashed in order to preserve the state. Like I said, I worry about the United States going down the same path because I'm seeing some very worrying trends, some red flags. So, for instance, we're seeing this loss of value in the truth. There's my truth, there is your truth, there's us, there's them. This tribalism is really starting to take hold in our society. And an objective truth doesn't seem real. We feel like when somebody's saying, oh, this is the truth, they're using that as a tool to manipulate us to join their side, or to basically, refute our side, our truth. And that's a very dangerous thing. And politicians and the media have both played this game because it works. Politicians can get us to vote if they just keep repeating the same misinformation again and again. And it's not just one side. Republicans and Democrats both do it. And, Democrats like to point out that, well, Republicans do it worse. And then Republicans are like, well, you do it too. And I'm not here to indulge that blame game. The truth is both sides are being manipulative. And they do it because it serves their objectives, their strategic goals. Politicians want more people to show up. Politicians want people to donate money. And so, basically casting, themselves as heroes, the other side as enemies, set to destroy the country. This really galvanizes people, and it works. The problem is we're falling for it, right? If they want to tell us these lies, that's fine, but we don't have to buy it, right? I think that's, and because I'm not blaming people, I'm not blaming us for being part of the problem, blaming us in the sense that we can educate ourselves and see past these lies, and that's where our power lies. But this whole process of having a conservative media station, a liberal media station, a conservative party, a liberal party, each feeding in on their own realities, it really takes away from the truth. And like I mentioned, one of the threads that connects those failed states, those stagnant states, those states that Trump likes to refer to as shithole countries, one thread that connects them is this loss of objective reality, objective truth, and a tendency to think of the world and see the world in terms of us and them, where quote unquote truth doesn't matter, right? That's their truth. That's their lie. We know the truth. This is a very dangerous thing. And, like I said, politicians and the media are to blame for creating and promoting this, but we don't have to buy it. The other thread I mentioned that I'm seeing here is the corruption. We all look at our governments and we're like, well, why do these wealthy people, why are their interests represented and ours not? And then we see that there are lobbyists in government that, get paid to influence politicians. We see that there are super PACs and C4s and all these organizations that funnel cash to campaigns and politicians. There are, you know, even the courts have been influenced and seem to be passing laws that benefit corporations and benefit the wealthy. The good news is this corruption hasn't spread throughout society. It's limited to these upper echelons of government, business, etc. But after a while, it may seep down. If times get hard, economic times get hard, people may also resort to this kind of behavior, further bringing us down this path. So this loss of an idea of objective reality, objective truth, this tribalism, this corruption that we see in society, all of these things lead to a sense of confusion, fear, anxiety, anger. People feel powerless. And so as a result, in order to get some of that power back, this is a trend I see around the world too. People tend to spread conspiracy theories because it's a way to make sense of something that's nonsensical, right? It's a way to gain some of our power back, to feel that we really understand what's going on, right? And unfortunately, that is one more thing that I see spreading in the United States that I did not ever believe would be spread around here, right? This is something that I saw coming from the third world. This was something from failed societies. This is not an American thing, but it is now. And I don't blame people for spreading conspiracy theories. What I blame, again, are the politicians and media for creating an environment where the people feel disenfranchised. They feel powerless. They feel left in the dark. They feel left behind. And there's a shared responsibility there. For me personally, it really hurts. My family came from places around the world where might made right, where corruption and authoritarianism and corruption and bribery and all these things were rampant. They truly were shithole countries. And that's not to take away from the people, People are good. People are honest. People are trying to survive and do their best. And the same thing is happening here slowly. I think we have to understand it's not because of immigrants. It's because of all of us and the individual decisions we make as Americans. Will we fall for these lies? Will we give in to corruption? Will we accept it as normal? Will we, think in terms of us and them? Will we reject the idea of truth, or will we try to bring those things back and demand this from the media, demand this from our politicians? And those who don't serve us, we don't vote for. We can find candidates, we can find politicians. I sincerely believe that, I can throw a rock at someone in my neighborhood and hit somebody who would do a better job than people in Washington right now. So is there still hope for us? My answer is yes, there is. We differ in many ways from these countries that I'm talking about, from countries like Syria and, Haiti and etc. All these countries around the world, these stagnant economies, these failed states, and the reason is we don't have a dictatorship. We have a democracy. We have a legislature. We have a judiciary branch. We have state and local governments that also are a balance to any one branch of the federal government, or even the entire federal government. So I am hopeful. And I think the thing that differentiates us most is voting. We have revolution built into our system. We do not have to take to the streets. We do not have to topple a regime. We do not have to die and spill the blood of our neighbors, our family, our friends in order to change our government. this can be done peacefully, and it's an incredible blessing. And I think we all really need to, you know, take a minute and really process that. So now that I've established that we are different, that there is still hope, what can we do? So I see that we need to stop doing two things, and we just start doing two things. The first thing we need to stop is this tribalism. And that's something we can easily do in our own minds, in our own hearts, in our own lives. And it's this idea of othering people. And I really, you know, I've given, you know, I've had other episodes about this. How can we reach across our differences? How can we find the humanity in those who we disagree with? How can we, you know, understand that their votes don't mean they are the worst version of the people we've seen holding those opinions, or the worst versions of the people we see that they vote for. They are not the enemy. You know, we have shared interests. We have shared values. We have shared goals. To help us address this tribalism, we also have to take a cold, hard look and understand that it's not just the other party that lies. Acknowledge that both sides lie, right? We can talk about the degree to which people lie later, but just acknowledge that. If we can acknowledge that, that's a starting point. Then we can have a conversation with the other side, and we can look at our side objectively in that conversation. The other thing that we need to stop, the second thing, is Trump. We must reject Trump. And I know I just said let's not get into partisanship. It's not partisanship, because like I said, both parties have led us to where we are right now. Both parties have lied to us. Both parties have manipulated us, and they've brought us to this point where we are now, where Trump can come in, swoop in, and say these ineffectual leaders are destroying this country and I'm going to fix it, and elevate the vitriol, the lies, the corruption to an even unheard of level. Okay? So I'm not saying Republicans or Democrats are to blame. I'm saying all of them are to blame, and Trump has just taken the game to the next level. And we need to recognize that. He needs to be rejected. All of these things that he calls for, this hatred of others, this endorsement of corruption, the distortion of truth and reality. Trump has taken it to a whole other level, demanding loyalty to himself before the country, pitting Americans against Americans, ruling by fear, not just tolerating corruption, but promoting it, and rewarding loyalty with advancement over competence. And I said there are two things we need to start doing. So the first thing is educating ourselves about other countries, educating ourselves about history, educating ourselves about power, politics, and economics, wherever your curiosity takes you. But study World War II if that's what you're interested in. Study, you know, the colonialism. Study the kings that the founding fathers of this country fought against, and why they fought against them. Examples of authoritarian rule abound in our world. And understanding why our founding fathers created this country and what it was in reaction to is really important, so that we don't fall into the trap of repeating history and bringing back those very vicious forms of government that may in the beginning promise salvation but deliver oppression. If we look at World War II, it's actually a really great case in point, because these are democracies, at least democracies that led to authoritarian rule. So if you look at, you know, what happened in Europe, even in Nazi Germany, the communists and the fascists were both fighting to tell the people we were going to deliver you from this difficult financial situation we find ourselves in post World War I. The Nazis end up winning, and they represented kind of a far right side of the political spectrum. But it was that far right authoritarian government that ended up turning against the people themselves, because they had to identify an enemy. They identified the Jews, they identified the mentally and physically disabled, they identified the Roma, the Gypsies, all of these as enemies of the people, all of these as taking down or weakening the population. The problem with fascists, the problems with these populist far-right movements, is they don't just create enemies within their nation, they create enemies outside of the nation. And so inevitably, these countries end up in wars. They end up in conflicts with other nations. And because they just care about themselves, that unites all of their former enemies against them. And that's what happened in World War II. That's what caused, Italy and Germany and Japan to eventually get defeated. But in World War II, there was an example of a far left government, the communists of Russia, of the Soviet Union. So they came in again promising to deliver the people from the economic and political hardships they were dealing with. During Lenin's time, they were attempting to do that. By the time Stalin came to power during World War II, the people of the Soviet Union themselves became the enemy of the state, because the state couldn't provide for them, because they didn't want to change course, and so the only thing they could do was preserve themselves, and so they became authoritarian. Both extremes in the political spectrum can become authoritarian. The one exception, or the prominent exception I've seen, is China. China started out as a communist revolution, but when the communist ideas were not leading to results, they changed course. And they were very fortunate to bring industry and business into their country, which has lifted everybody out of poverty. But they're nonetheless authoritarian, and they have cracked down on groups like the Uyghurs, the Tiananmen protesters, among other groups in the country. And there's always a risk in the future that this could turn against the people. So, but that's one of the few cases where I've seen the revolution not completely turn against the people, but the potential is always there with that form of government. The second thing we need to do is find people who bridge this divide, who can see beyond right and left, Republican and Democrat, and instead, not just in rhetoric, but in reality, bridge our divide. Don't just talk about diversity, but then reject conservative ideas, or talk about freedoms and reject liberals and their ideas. And let's find them and put them in power. So we're kind of coming to the end. In every episode, I try to share some way that we can take these big ideas, these big problems rather, that cause us stress, that seem too big to tackle, and show myself and you how there are little things we can each be doing to change the course of history, to tip the scale in a more productive, positive way. It's all those little decisions that people make, all those little different ways of thinking, different ways of acting that can tip us into destruction or tip us into thriving. Sometimes it is as easy as just a mindset change. Those things you can do in the comfort of your house. Those things you can do by speaking to your friends and family. Some are a bit more energy intensive. They require us to go out into the world and do things. This problem I'm talking about today, this danger to our society, does require both. And, there's this temptation to say, look, man, I'm tired. I've got a full-time job, I've got a family, I've got this, I've got that. I don't have time. And I do not blame you. I feel the same way. It's not right. It's not fair. This is the job of government. This is the job of media. But the government, they decided, you know what? It's not their job. The media, they decided it's not their job either. Even for both of them, yeah, it's their job. What did they do instead? They followed the money. They followed the easy way, and it corrupted them. And now it's slowly tearing us apart, destroying the society and the world, if I'm honest. And so we're really this last line of defense. If we fall prey to that same laziness, if we fall prey to that same corruption, if we just keep following this path, we really do risk becoming a shithole country. Sorry for that crude term, but really nothing captures it like that. It truly is shit. You do not want to live in a society like that. My family fled from places like that to come to here, and to see it fall apart, to see it being threatened, it hurts. I hope we can take that anger and frustration and turn it into something productive. Not venting, not protesting, not vilifying the other, but using that energy to come together, using that energy to be productive and heal our nation. And I do believe that a United States that lives up to the best parts of it, to the idealism that the founding fathers wrote down in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, if we can live up to those ideals in this country and around the world would be a much better place. It'll be an incredible place. Right now, this time in history, it's an opportunity. It's a wake-up call. Where do we want this world to go? Where do we want our society to go? Do we want to fight and harm each other and drag each other down into the lowest depths of humanity? Or do we want to raise each other up? Because it's our choice. Thank you for your time, and I wish you the best. Goodbye.